Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. And we are here. Hello.
Hello.
We are here today. We have a guest. So, Mark, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, hey, I am so excited to be here. My name is Mark Leslie, and I am a Canadian author of speculative fiction and true ghost stories, or for the non-believers, tales told as true. I've got about half a dozen books of true ghost stories from different locales, as well as urban fantasy. Canadian werewolf series, probably the most popular one. But I kind of write all across the map, but I'm constantly returning to those dark and eerie shadows.
So I've been having fun seeing the pictures come in. Tell us about, is it Canadian Mounted? My brain blank.
The Canadian Mounted is not a pornographic novel, although in the script for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles by John Hughes, it reads that Del Griffith, John Candy's character, is reading a pornographic novel in the airport at LaGuardia when they first meet. And that's what he's reading when he says, "I know you, don't I? I'm usually pretty good with names, but I'll be darned if I haven't forgotten yours." And that's when they first meet officially. And so the Canadian Mounted was a real book published in the 80s. And I saw it in the movie, and I'm a big book nerd, so I was very intrigued by it. Then I saw it in Deadpool 2. And I thought, what's going on with this? Is this like the Wilhelm scream? You know, the one that movie producers always use, like there's this newspaper that appears in all this movie, or the sound effects. And I wondered about that. And then I learned it had been a real book. It had gone out of print. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool on the 35th anniversary of one of my favorite films to do a book of trivia about planes, trains, and automobiles and call it the Canadian Mounted, just to give them a prop they can hold up and read when they're in an airport.
And it's perfect because everybody's sending you pictures.
I know. I love marketing.
Yes. Well, exactly. I guess that I should start telling people I have a story, and it's about a creature in a toilet, basically a rest stop toilet. I still get pictures of porta potties and stuff from people. So I guess I should start asking them to tag me. That's for free.
Come up with a hashtag.
Yeah. A little disturbing, but quite fun.
Okay, and I probably send half of them. So
I get a lot.
Every beer festival I go to, if there's a porta potty, I take a picture and write, "If you don't hear back from me in 10 minutes, please alert someone."
You got to be safe.
Right?
I guess they're both entertaining, I guess. So you have, tell me about writing that ghost story books. How did you go and research those? And
so it's interesting. The stories I wanted to share with you are a different way of getting them, but I usually set out to do research in advance. I will go on local ghost walks whenever I travel. I love that. Great way to learn about a city. I buy a lot of books when I travel. I love going into bookstores, local bookstores. The first thing I look for is local ghost stories, and I just buy them up. He's like, "Oh, this is good. I'm going to take it home." And I have probably 100 that I haven't read yet, but they're there in case I need to do research. And I have subscription to newspapers.com, which has archives of newspapers, especially, between like 1870 and 1930, there were just ghost stories printed in the newspaper. It was like very common. And so there's a lot of great old ghost stories you can research. So magazines, newspapers, come on, going into the library and going on the microfiche and getting printouts of old newspaper. And honestly, librarians are some of the best resources. Going to a local library and say, "Hey, I'm researching this town, this city." And sometimes when you get the right research librarian, their eyes light up and they're like, "Oh my God, we're going to have a good time this afternoon." I can spend hours there. And oftentimes you can't take things out of the archives, but they'll allow you to pay for photocopies and stuff. And so that's how most of the research is done. Some of it is interviews. I have a form on my website where I solicit people to fill out details, and then I can get their permission to potentially call them or email them back and forth or do a video chat so I can kind of get more details from them. And every once in a while, they happen upon me at book signings where I'm signing, one of my ghost story books, and someone, waits to the end and then kind of whispers conspiratorially in my ear, "I have a ghost story to tell you."
Yay. That's fun because people ask, I'm sure you get this too. Why did you start writing dark, horror? What happened in your life that made you do this? Yeah. Okay. It's not that dramatic, but, but the first thing I really got into was local ghost stories when I was living in Maryland. And there's, rich history over on the East Coast where we had stuff first, and of course there were a ton about the White House and all that stuff. That's something I'd love to revisit at some point, but that's what really got me started. And then you expand into all the fiction but I would go to the library and spend hours finding those books and just reading them there. And loved it. So yeah, I love that aspect. All right, so we should probably go ahead and get started.
If you're thinking of starting a podcast or even just starting to research it, Buzzsprout is your go-to source for information and hosting. They have tons of videos and write-ups on everything you need to know about recording and distributing a podcast, and they even provide easy ways to get analytics on how your podcast is doing. We use Buzzsprout for our podcast hosting, and through them, we've been able to connect with tons of resources and distributors. Following a link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know we sent you, gets you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and help support our show. A win-win. Not only do they help you get started, but they also do small things to encourage you, such as awarding you badges as you hit various milestones. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world.
We didn't discuss. Do you want to go first? Or
completely up to you. I can go first if you want me to.
I guess since I'm babbling, I'll go first. First, I have to put a disclaimer. So I'm covering Jack Fiddler. And basically the Fiddler brother. Are you familiar with them? A bit? No? Okay. So I'm going to say the word now. So he was a famous wendigo hunter. And here's my disclaimer though. Wendigo. There are, somebody's going to be pissed off no matter how I pronounce this. Different nations, tribes, clans in the area even say it differently from each other. So I chose one so I'd be consistent, folks. So sorry to the people who are going to be pissed. But no matter what I do, one of you will think that I'm saying it wrong. So, yeah. Okay, so in 1907, 2 Northwest mounted police officers had headed up north in hopes of enforcing their legal standards on the indigenous people living there. The area had some of the last indigenous people to still be under their own law, not Canadian law. And that resistance was really pissing some people off. And they were looking to change it. Stories had trickled down about murders occurring. And upon arriving, the men were told about Jack Fiddler, who was not only the chief of the Sucker tribe, or it could be Suker, but a respected shaman. It was felt he had influence over animals and that he protected his people from wendigo and other evil spirits. About a year before, Jack had killed his brother's daughter-in-law, as the family had claimed she was becoming wendigo. It appears she was strangled with a string, is what I kept reading, and I'm like, that's not humane. Are we sure it was a string? Kind of horrifying. Wendigo is a forest spirit said to be created when someone resorts to cannibalism, among other reasons. There's, everybody's got their reasons for why it happens. It's humanoid with long limbs and deeply emaciated. It constantly hungers. That's really its thing, is that it is always hungry. Various tribes believe in it, but its origins appear to be among the Algonquian tribes in northern Ontario. The legend has gone as far south as northern U.S. states, especially around the Great Lakes. So it did infiltrate down into the tribes there as well. Basically, it exists in areas where dangerous snowstorms sucked people in, sometimes so severely that individuals had to resort to cannibalism to survive until travel was possible again. And it reminds me of Russia and how cannibalism is seen very different there, because they had a lot of situations where it was something that people ended up having to do. And down here in the lower U.S. states, it's not something that could ever be reasonable. But if you got to eat, you got to eat. So someone turning wendigo had a long transformation process ahead of them that involved them being weak and sick. You would see the person just thinning out and getting weaker. And of course, we can look back and we can say, we know a lot of diseases that work in this way, kind of wasting diseases, we might call them, where you can visibly see this happening to a person. It was believed that the person transforming should be killed before the process finished, as the creature was hard to kill, but also because to save their soul, it had to be done before they became wendigo. So all of this is important, just giving people a little background on it so they understand why people might have been murdering people for this. It should also be noted that much later, the term wendigo fever would be used to describe people who suffered what are now called delusions that they were turning into wendigo. So that was kind of a real thing as well. The officers arrested Jack and his brother Joseph for her murder. While in custody, Jack told them that he had killed at least 14 wendigos, or those transforming into the creature, and that it was family members who came to him and asked for his help. Sometimes the besieged person themselves would ask for him to kill them before the spirit could completely take over. So he wasn't just going and randomly killing people. A lot of the time they were one of the people, they were the ones asking him to do this. And if not, it was their loved ones. In investigating among the Sucker people of Deer Lake and those in neighboring clans, it was repeatedly stated that their family members had been transforming, that they had been seriously ill, and that they had asked for him to put them out of their misery before the transformation had been completed. His people fully believed he had done them a service. Killing the afflicted kept everyone else safe, is how it was seen. This had been going on well before Jack came along, and in fact, his father was also a highly respected spiritual leader and was known as a Wendigo killer as well. One of Jack's brothers was said to have been killed when an expedition he was on ran into trouble and he resorted to cannibalism. It was thought he was becoming Wendigo and had to be killed. So this was long running. This was not a twisted serial killer. It's complicated. Though his actual birth date is not known, it's estimated that Jack Fiddler was born around 1839. At that time, overtrapping of animals for the sale of their furs had created an absence of animals. Hudson's Bay Company had moved into the area while trapping was good and actively transported the furs out of the area. They also provided trade to indigenous people in the area, but when the animals disappeared, so did Hudson's Bay Company, making it harder for those living in the area to get the trade items they needed. It made for many rough years. In fact, the fur trade wouldn't improve again until the 1860s is about where it seemed to. But as soon as the animal population bounced back, boop, so did Hudson's Bay Company. There they were again. It's thought Jack worked in the fur trade, possibly on trade ships for a time on a river. He had 5 wives and 13 children, which was not a rare situation at the time. Because the death rates were so high among young ages, this polygamy and whatnot was a thing they did. And it wasn't an easy life at all. Unfortunately for Jack and Joseph, the media at the time was already very anti-First Nations, and their practices were often demonized in the papers. I mean, just any practices, not even killing people because they thought they were turning into a monster. With public sentiment against them already for being Indigenous, the brothers' story hitting the papers caused intense outrage and calls for their heads. They wanted these two dead. They wanted them to pay. People felt they were devil worshippers practicing black magic. Now they were murderers too. One Montreal Daily Witness headline read, "Devil worship among the Cree," over this. They didn't even believe in the devil, so why would they be worshiping him? That's always what I get a kick out of that. On September 30th, 1907, Jack either escaped his imprisonment at Norway House or was allowed out for a walk. Stories differed on it, so I'm giving you both options. However, he got out. His body was found hanging from a tree. It was felt he had committed suicide. Interestingly, I found a couple forums where people claimed his body had massive wounds as of bear claws or something else, or, maybe a wendigo raking his body. But I don't believe there's any truth to that story. I think he went out and he hanged himself, and that's it. Jack's death kept him from facing trial, but Joseph was still alive. He hadn't escaped. So he did have to go forward with his trial. He had worked with his brother for some time in carrying out these deaths, but I couldn't find out if he'd been there every time and what his body count was. For whatever reason, he's not as famous as his brother. So I don't think he was doing it as consistently. It was argued that these were the beliefs of these people and that they had been unaware of Canadian law, living under their own laws. It was also maintained that the people killed had all been suffering. So even if there was no such thing as a Wendigo, these people were most likely actually very ill and they had been mercifully euthanized. except not if they were strangled with a string.
I was going to say, except for that piece of
That one
string.
I'm
That
still
just
like,
seems.
yeah.
It's a fiddle string, right?
right. Sure. There were no outside doctors helping the indigenous people in that area, and they were doing what they believed in. Both indigenous and white people who knew the brothers came to his defense. So Hudson's Bay Company was tried to defend him as well. It didn't matter, though. Joseph was found guilty of the murder. He was not allowed to have legal representation at all during the trial, and he did not speak English. So to be clear, he was on trial, didn't know what they were saying, couldn't defend himself. They wouldn't know what he was saying. There was no translator, and it didn't matter because he didn't get to speak. So their law, that was so much more civil and humane and correct, wasn't great. Hudson's Bay Company had sent a representative who worked extensively with the indigenous people of the area and knew the brothers, but he was also not allowed to take the stand in Joseph's defense. Nobody was allowed to take the stand in Joseph's defense. The magistrate, Commissioner Islesworth, was quoted as saying, "What the law forbids, no pagan belief can justify." Joseph's case was appealed, but he died in 1909 due to ill health, only 3 days before his appeal succeeded. He would have been set free. But these guys, when they were arrested, they were in probably their 70s or 80s, it's felt. These weren't young, spry men doing this. So Jack's son Robert took over the tribe, but he had to sign a treaty that allowed Canadian law to rule over the area's people. His reign ended the familial line of Wendigo killers and brought the sucker people further into society's norms of the time. So I have to wonder if part of the reason they were prosecuted was to get the current leader out of the way, because that was Jack, in order to allow them to legally take over the area. These were the holdouts. There's absolutely no reason they should have been able to be prosecuted under a law they weren't under, that they didn't follow. Then again, that's still a fight happening in North America in various ways anyway. So when looking back, Wendigo lore is thought to be about many things. The most obvious is the fear of starvation and isolation. There's a lot of psychological reasons behind this, and the horrors of cannibalism used to survive. But it was also about avoiding greed and selfishness. This is a big thread running through when you look on forums about this, that among indigenous folks, and maintaining a relationship with nature. Wendigo is actually really complicated when it comes to nature. Animals were said to respond differently than people to them. And there's a whole thing, if people want to look up the real story and not what we see in movies, which is always a bastardization and a twist because it's not being made by, say, the Algonquian tribes. So be careful what you read. But in general, it was a cautionary tale passed down verbally to keep people safe in a harsh climate and an ultimately changing landscape in a time that was changing a ton for these folks. So my sources for this were stories from the reservation on Tumblr, Wikipedia, the Siren newspaper, Animalian, and something called Ozzy, O-Z-Y, that had stories about it.
Oh. Did you pick that because you had a Canadian guest who grew up in mid-northern Ontario on the show?
I did.
Very lovely. Because that's kind of what life's like right now in Canada still, cannibalism, murdering people with fiddle strings, all the things.
Yeah, it's still relevant. Every time it snows.
Oh my God, it happens, right? Because, like shortage of toilet paper, eggs, all the things. Oh my
gosh. Just imagine what mythical creature we could create from that.
Oh, no. I don't want to know.
I don't want to.
Maybe that's my job.
Potty go.
Yes. Might be too on point.
Yeah, maybe.
That sounds like something you'd see advertised on Amazon. Potty go. How to train your toddler to use the toilet.
Oh no. Just get the potty books. Okay.
Yeah.
No, we're pretty lucky. We did not resort to cannibalism during the last snowstorm, nor even during the pandemic. So that was good. Yeah.
I'm surprised about that. So, so I remember I was on a mom's board back in the day, but actually most of them were from Ontario, but I had somebody on there from Edmonton and somebody, oh, I can't remember where she was from, but it's much farther up north. And they have way too much fun with snowmobiles there where she lives. She lives like a little town. But anyway, so we would always discuss, well, not always, but it would come up. What do Canadians stereotype? How do they stereotype Americans? And vice versa. And the number of people they said had asked them if they had igloos is
pretty
astounding.
Common. It's pretty common. Well, I take my snow machine although I grew up in a town where you would get around in the winter, like you go to some restaurant or whatever off the highway, and there'd be more snow machines than vehicles. Like
the one for, and I wish I could remember where she lives, but that's really what they have. Her daughter, from a very young age, because we were all together because our kids were due the same month. So her daughter, my son's age, was driving around her own smaller snowmobile at a really young age. And I was like, this is so cool. If I didn't hate the cold, I would covet everything else about what you're doing in this little town that you live in. But
you could get your license when you were 14, your snowmobile license when you were 14.
Okay.
Yeah. And you couldn't drive alongside roads, but you could cross them perpendicular.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it was kind of like 2 years before you could drive. In the winter, you could get around on a vehicle. So
I'm just astounded. I'm like, wow, you could get a snowmobile license. Nobody I knew ever did that. Everybody just got on them and drove. Because our rule was when you could start it by yourself, you were old enough to drive it by yourself.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Because it had the
pull start. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. And that's a good workout.
Yes, it is.
No wonder we had to resort to eating one another.
Although I have read the warming trend in general, dare I say global warming, that it's impacting winter tourism because there's not as much snow, and the places that rely on the snowmobilers to come in, because there are places that they're open in the summer, like the summer and the fall, then they open up again for a spell in the winter, and they're not getting enough snow to open.
Well, I mean, our own ski resorts here are making snow a lot of the time because it's just not enough.
Yeah. A lot of the ski hills have to do that, especially. I mean, I'm in southern Ontario now, and we got rain, so all the snow that I shoveled a few weeks ago is all gone.
Yeah, and it melts, it evaporates really fast here. Yeah. So, are you ready to tell us yours?
Yeah, I thought you'd asked the question about where I get my research, and one of the things I thought I would share would be the things that happen by accident, those happy, spooky accidents where you weren't planning on researching the story, but it landed in your lap. And we'll stay in Canada, but I am going to take you over to Alberta. I was on because of the books I write. I'm on a lot of great podcasts like yours and radio programs that want to talk about paranormal stuff. And I was a guest in March of 2015 on George Noory's Coast to Coast AM, which is, simulcast all over the place. And it's, from midnight till 3 a.m. And I think I was talking about my book of haunted bookstores and libraries called Tomes of Terror. Prop holds up a prop. I was talking about that book because it came out in 2014. Haunted bookstores and libraries. Come on, I haunt bookstores and libraries. Great place. And so I was on the show. I'm in my living room in my apartment. It's middle of the night, and I get scared so easily. And towards the last half of the show, there's a live call-in. And one of the call-in folks shared a story. And that was one of the stories that ended up going into prop time again, haunted hospitals, which I had been researching at the time. So I'd already started to do some research for haunted hospitals. I wasn't quite done. And lo and behold, serendipitous moment is one of the guests shares a story that ended up going into the Haunted Hospitals book. And the story was this person who worked at the Ponoka. It was called the Ponoka Hospital for the Insane, which is in mid-northern Alberta. And they called in sharing a story they had never shared before. So they had worked there. They did a lot of overnight shifts. And there was a woman that we'll call Martha, who was sort of a lifelong resident of this. She'd been there forever. There were some issues with Martha. They actually had meetings. They believed she may have been possessed. And she would get violent and angry, and it would take multiple people to hold her down, and they were constantly having to inject her to just calm her down and put her out, because she was going to hurt herself. She was going to hurt other people. Other things that had happened with Martha were she would complain that her room was so cold. It was like a meat locker when you went in there. And then they would, try and there was nothing wrong with the radiator. Nothing was, broken. They'd move her to another room. And about an hour after they moved her to another room, the room she had been in was perfectly warm again. And the room she moved into was ice cold again. So weird things had happened. They'd even brought in priests trying to figure out what they could do with Martha. And then one night, this person was working the shifts where they had to go and do the rounds. And they walked into Martha's room because they heard voices. Because every once in a while, you would hear Martha as if she was having a conversation with someone, and you'd walk into the room and there was no one there. So they hear voices. They go into the room, and even though there was voices just a second before they opened the door, they walked into the door, and there's Martha sleeping, except she's not just sleeping. She is sleep standing, but she's not just sleep standing normally. She's sleep standing horizontally over top of the bed, about 2 feet above the bed, with her feet up against the wall, facing out into the room, hair hanging down. So gravity's obviously still working there, hanging down over her face, completely asleep, not responding to anything. They walk into the room, see her standing like that up against the wall, and then slowly back out the door, go back into the television room, sit down, can't figure out what to say because they can't explain what they saw, and never breathed a word about this at all until that show in March of 2015, live radio decided to share the story. So this freaked me out. This chilled me. I still remember sitting there just chilled, and I'm making notes. And so when we got towards the end of the show and we were off the air, I was talking to the producer and I said, "Hey, can you reach out to this guest? Would it be okay if I get their contact information? Because I'd love to talk to them, because I'm doing this book, Haunted Hospitals." They did so. They put me in contact with this person. This person was willing to talk to me. And about 2.5 weeks later, we had a call, a really long call. And this person shared with me two really interesting things. They felt so relieved that they had finally shared this story. Second, they had a friend who'd worked at the same place and knew them and knew Martha, but and was interested in the paranormal because they couldn't explain the weirdness that surrounded her. This friend decided to meet them at a Tim Hortons. That's a Canadian Dunkin' Donuts chain. Very, very Canadian. I got to go to Timmy's, eh? They met at Tim Hortons.
Yes.
Where the friend said, "I recognized your voice on the radio program I was listening, and I'm so glad you shared it, because I had a very similar instance happen to me." And they had said that around the same time, and this is goes back more than a decade or so, around the same time, they were working a different night shift and went in to check on Martha and found a very similar situation. They heard voices in the room. They walked into the room. When they walked into the room, Martha was sleep standing, but this time she was sleep standing vertically, and she was about 1.5 feet off of the floor, just standing straight up. Her eyes, even though she was asleep, her eyes were open. He was looking straight at the person in the door, and it said, "And I never told anyone until now because I was so scared that I was the only one that saw something so outrageously unexplainable." And so that was an example of a really amazing serendipitous moment of those two, that one thing happening and two different people feeling the relief of being able to share the story. Speaking of serendipity, one of the other sort of tie-ins to this is I was in the lobby at the Antlers in Colorado Springs for Superstars writing seminars, and this kicked off an annual tradition now of the Haunted Parlor, where we share ghost stories. But it was just late night. The bar had closed. We're all sitting around talking, and we were all just sitting in this sort of long L-shaped couch and a bunch of armchairs in the corner of the lobby, sharing some stories. And as I was sharing some of these stories, one of the other authors was also an artist and had sketched this really eerie sketch of Martha on the wall. And ironically, from that conversation, a book, an anthology of haunted collectible items called Cursed Collectibles was born. So like this one phone call in 2015 has led to some great stories, some people feeling, really good about relieving themselves of this burden of not having told anyone. And then, of course, a whole bunch of really cool horror authors or authors who wanted to write ghost stories. And I had got to participate in this anthology. So serendipity.
Yes. I can just imagine when it came time to go check the rooms, everybody's like, I'm not checking Martha's.
Yeah.
Who got that losing straw?
Yeah, it's like constantly, no, I got Martha's room again.
The new person. It was always the new guy.
Well, I can't wait until this episode airs because my oldest daughter listens to it. And she is a social worker at a state psych hospital.
Oh, okay.
So in Kansas. But I'm like, well, so thing one, when you're listening to this, if you have any stories, you need to be coughing them up. I mean, she has plenty of stories, don't get me wrong. But so far,
But not about ghosts.
no, none of them have been haunted. Because when you
Yeah.
first started talking about Martha, I'm like going, yep, this all tracks for being in a mental facility.
Right, yeah.
But then the hovering above the bed, no, that's
not a symptom of something that we know from, scientific study and medical research.
Yeah. So I'm dying to know if Martha is still with us or if Martha's gone.
I believe Martha had passed on. Martha had passed on, and that was one of the reasons why the person felt, they could share the story. But Martha had no family. It was just Martha on her own. And so again, that's not Martha's real name, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I want to
That's
know
fair.
Martha's story.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. That is intriguing. Yeah.
Before she ended up there, which it probably wouldn't even exist for anybody if she didn't have anybody in her life. But
Mhm.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
found community. All right.
Scary.
It is.
All
Just
right.
checking on her, and she's floating above the ground, and her eyes are wide open, but she's asleep. Like just a combination of freaky.
I bet they started knocking before they went in. Pound, 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 pound.
It was like,
Really loud. Wake Martha up. And then you hear a thump.
Oh,
okay, we can go in now.
yeah. Oh, sounds like Martha's awake. We could go in.
Yeah.
Okay, so my story has the Northeast connection. It has a lot of mayhem and a ghost.
All right.
You got to be patient though to get to the ghost. So I'm going to take a flying leap and assume that most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Dewey Decimal System.
I don't know. Occasionally.
Oh my God. I was just all morning. I was just thinking all about it. I was hoping someone would raise that.
Yeah. So we all did the research papers in high school, and you had to learn where to look for what books, and so we all know what it is. So Melville Dewey's name came up in a conversation, and I was shocked to learn what a repellent human being he was. I mean, he did all this great stuff, but he was such a pain in the ass. So his full name was Melville Lewis Kossuth, I think, Dewey. He was born December 10th, 1851 in Adams Center, New York. So yes, I always like to get the Adirondacks in whenever I can. I can't help myself. So he was the youngest of 5 children. And from a young age, I mean, like as a child, he was determined to reform education for the masses, which is yeah, I'm sure I wanted the Barbie camper. That was as a young child. I wasn't reforming anything. So he got his bachelor's and master's degrees from Amherst College in Massachusetts. While he was a student, he founded the Library Bureau, which sounds great, but it's actually a business that provides standardized index cards and filing cabinets, what we would call card catalogs, to libraries. So it's kind of interesting that his organizational methods work best with the equipment that his company just happens to manufacture.
Mm-hmm.
What a shocker. That's never happened before. As a young man, this I found really hilarious. As a young man, he advocated for spelling reform And I'm like, have you not studied the history of the English language? You can't. You just can't. He changed his name from Melville was spelled with 2 L's and an E on the end. He had it legally changed to Melvil, and he briefly changed his last name to Dewey, D-U-I. So he wanted to get rid of all excess letters. Extraneous letters just chapped his butt. And it's really funny because there was a restaurant in Lake Placid, I think it's Lake Placid, where the menu for years, decades, the menu was written according to these rules. So all the extraneous letters were taken out.
Huh.
Yeah, I found a menu page. There was something I was like, I can't figure out what this is supposed to be.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, that's so easy for
Bizarre.
people. Yeah. So other professional accomplishments include chief librarian at Columbia University, director of the New York State Library, establishing a program of traveling libraries, which is a phenomenal thing, executive officer of the University of the State of New York, and he was eventually a member of the American Library Association's Hall of Fame. And they even named a medal after him, one of their highest awards. But we're going to circle back around to that later. So in 1895, Dewey and his wife Annie founded the Lake Placid Club, which was a social recreation club. And in the Lake Placid Club, no kidding, it was in Lake Placid, New York. And he and his son Godfrey were instrumental in bringing the 1932 Winter Olympics to Lake Placid. Fun fact, in 1926, he opened another branch of the club in Florida called the Lake Placid Club Lodge, spelled L-O-J. But then the Great Depression happened and the lodge closed and it was eventually torn down. There is a Lake Placid in Florida. Betty White doesn't live there, nor does a giant alligator.
Damn it.
Right?
Lame.
So he was best known for the development of the Dewey Decimal System, which allowed libraries to have a standardized method of organizing information, which in and of itself is a wonderful thing. He helped create best practices for library loss management, circulation, and data retention. And I wrote that sentence and then wrote, well, that's just leaving everybody breathless with excitement at this point.
I'm just trying to figure out if the needing to get rid of extraneous letters is some sort of form of OCD, or I have no idea.
I don't know.
My brain's still trying to wrap itself around that.
So here's a direct quote, because he's such a swell guy, from Wikipedia. For decades, Dewey refused to stop his unwelcome hugging, unwelcome touching, and certainly unwelcome kissing with female subordinates and others, according to biographer Wayne A. Wigand. When he opened the School of Library Economy at Columbia College, he required a photo from each female applicant, not every applicant, every female applicant, because he said, you cannot polish a pumpkin.
Wow.
Okay.
Now, I have heard a similar saying. It wasn't that, and it wasn't said in, I've always heard you can't polish a turd.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, you cannot.
Oh, he was highbrow.
But that's true.
Yeah.
In 1905, he was asked to leave the American Library Association, which he helped to found, because of complaints about his inappropriate advances on 4 female librarians during a 10-day trip to Alaska.
Okay.
This was all on one trip. He stepped down quietly in return for the association keeping quiet about why he was leaving. So in 1929, he was sued by a former employee for attempting to caress and kiss her in public.
Yeah.
He said he was just unconventional.
There's always a word for it, isn't there?
He said, here, how's this for twisted logic? Pure women would understand my ways.
Pure.
So if you were pure, you didn't mind him groping you? I can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pure spelled P-U-R.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely.
So beyond the way he's treating women, he was also extremely prejudiced against Blacks and Jews, making sure they weren't able to become members of his Lake Placid Club. And he went so far as to buy the land next to the club so that no Jews could buy it. I mean, this is right out of Auntie Mame.
Yeah.
You know, when she buys the land and opens the home for unwed mothers, which I love. So in June of 2019, it took until 2019, the American Library Association voted to replace the Melville Dewey Medal with the ALA Medal of Excellence. The decision was unanimous with no debate.
What does the ALA stand for?
American Library Association.
Oh.
That he helped found.
Wow.
Yeah. They're like, we don't even want to acknowledge he existed, even though he helped found it. So just to show you how far his biases went, the actual Dewey Decimal System itself reflects all of this. For example, the number 326 represents slavery. So following his lead, everything that had to do with any sort of Black history or creativity was filed under slavery. Black poetry, 326.
Ew.
Oh.
Ew.
Yeah. Yeah, right? You're like, it's just boggling. Anything having to do with LGBTQ plus issues was filed under abnormal psychology or medical disorders.
Oh.
And that's because we didn't really know what the numbers meant.
Right.
One hopes.
Yeah. Women's work is separate from jobs.
Oh.
Wow. Kitchen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a great one, though. The section on religion starts at 200. So 200 to 289 are given over to Christianity, leaving 10 digits, 290 to 299, for the world's other 4,000 or so religions.
Yeah, whatever.
They're not, and it's not adaptable. For instance, so it's a very static system. There's no way to classify graphic novels.
Oh.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, right? So
because the numbers were all already set.
yes. And one of the strongest reasons they have for keeping the Dewey Decimal System in schools instead of switching to the Library of Congress system is because, well, kids' parents are familiar with the Dewey Decimal System.
No, they're not.
Right? Not anymore.
I'm like, nobody knows anything about it. I mean, I'm sure librarians do. But yeah, I'm like, if you ask a random sampling of parents, they're going to go, what?
Yeah, I remember that. It was a thing.
You know it exists. As soon as you hear it, you know, yeah, that's the library number thing. But
right, but if you're not actively involved with it, I don't remember.
Wow.
I just look for the sign and it says memoirs or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I promised a ghost, and a ghost you shall have.
Oh.
So it's rumored that Dewey's first wife, Annie Godfrey Dewey, haunted the halls of the original Lake Placid Club after she died in 1922. And I think it was interesting that the articles made a note that her death was natural, that there was no suspicion around her death. They had to include that.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah. But staff recounted run-ins with her in the halls, and her ghost was reportedly often seen sitting in a rocking chair in the library. Since she was in her 70s when she died, it seems the old lady seen floating in the hallway is Annie.
She's the Ghostbusters ghost.
Yes. Her last words spoken to her nurse were to ask that a poem she had written, which was still sitting in the typewriter unfinished, be given to her husband, Melville, who she was writing it for.
Oh, okay.
And she had to have known what kind of a person he was. He was losing jobs. Because
was that the poem that began, how do you discuss me? Let me count thy ways.
It should have. So now I'm like, well, next time I'm in Lake Placid, I'm going to have to do a little more research.
Wow.
I didn't even know Lake Placid existed until that movie came out.
This was at the lodge, right? The LOG lodge in
No, that was the one in Florida.
Okay.
This is the one in New York.
Oh, this is the one in New York State. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So closer than for me.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would race you to Lake Placid, but you would obviously get there much before I would.
A little bit, yeah. On my snow machine.
I haven't ridden a snowmobile in decades.
I've never ridden a snowmobile, even though my grandparents in the Oregon mountains, there were also snowmobile trails and stuff.
Yeah.
So they had them, but I never got to ride
It's
them.
where we learn wind chill factor.
Ugh.
Frostbite on your nose and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And attaching the sleds behind the snowmobile. So
Yeah.
I would prefer a sandmobile somewhere tropical, please.
Sandmobile, yeah.
That'd be great. That's just an ATV.
I was going to say, I think those are called dune buggies.
Oh,
Dune
I would love a
buggies, yeah.
dune buggy. I really would.
No, we would like just ice fishing on those things, and you attach the sled, and you'd have all your auger, so you could cut through the ice and all the equipment and everything. It was just good times. Good times.
I don't
bet.
I don't understand ice fishing though. It's come up before. I don't get
Just
it.
on top of the ice, and you cut a hole, and then. But the thing is you could put little sticks with the fishing line, so you can go sit around the fire and stay warm. And then when you see the stick go, you run and you pull it.
I guess
right. Unlike a boat, you can't run on a little 6-foot boat.
Yes, but the wind chill when you're in the boat is generally not quite so cold.
No, that's true. That's true.
So.
Preferences. It doesn't. You got to have the little ice shack and do all that fun stuff. It's just
that came later.
Camping during the day.
Yeah.
Where do you put the fire, and why doesn't it melt through the ice?
The ice is like 8 feet thick in some spots, right? And sometimes you would be right. The fire would be on land, and you'd be fishing just offshore, or just
See, when we went ice skating, it was always on a frozen over pond. So if there was like a hillock sticking out of the pond, that was where the fire was. There was a big tire, and the fire was built inside of that, or it was on the edge of the pond.
Right.
I feel like I missed out on a lot of winter fun.
Well, when you're rural, you make fun where you can.
That's right.
I was farm rural.
Yeah.
And that was in Oregon. That was in Oregon, and we don't get that cold in Oregon. We do not, except up in the mountains. So yeah, aside from sledding and building ice forts and throwing snowballs and accidentally having ice in the middle of one of them that sliced open a friend's
accidentally.
No, actually I didn't realize, because the fort had started melting and it had dripped. It was a whole thing. It dripped just right onto some of the snowballs. See, and then they turned icy because it got cold, because it was later in the day. Because we built that fort, and then we prepared our arsenal. And there was another fort over here, and they had their arsenal, but their snowballs were not where the water dripped. I did not try and kill anybody that day.
I like that you added that day.
That's right. I did have forest fun though. I've never liked the cold much.
No.
It's not my thing. My bones don't like it.
No.
My husband's like, we should go to Alaska. And I'm all, actually, I wouldn't mind visiting Alaska. I'm sure it's lovely, but can we go in the summer?
Yeah. Black fly season, or then it's mosquito and black fly, or it's cold, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we're kind of lucky in Colorado because we don't have a lot of bugs.
That's funny. I had that talk with somebody yesterday who just moved here from California, and they lived in the Sonoran Desert, though, and they were like, there are more bugs here than where I came from. And I was like, what? Wait, tell me more. And because in the desert, there were even fewer bugs, because we don't have a lot of the bugs that are other places. It was an interesting conversation. I thought we were like at the lowest scale of bug. We're not.
I always tell people we have 4 mosquitoes in the whole state, and we share them.
Oh, wow. It's 4 in my bedroom every night, usually.
Or way more than 4 have found me. Yes. Random fact. Febreze is supposed to help deter mosquitoes.
Really?
I haven't tested it yet. I just learned that yesterday too.
You put when you put them in the dryer, the mosquitoes die, right?
That's right. Also dryer sheets.
It must be the Febreze.
No, it's Avon Skin So Soft.
I've heard that one too. And Victoria's Secret has released 2 sets of, like, I guess it's like, what are they? They have names for sets, and 2 of them have natural mosquito deterrents built in. And I was like, so you don't get bit in certain parts of your body, but everywhere else is fair game.
Because, that is the first thing you pack to go camping is your lingerie.
That's right.
Oh, it's the first thing. Yeah. My lingerie is the first thing I put in my,
And the last thing to get back.
Before the sleeping bag, before anything else.
Yeah. Before
They bring me. I'm the deterrent because all the mosquitoes come towards me and everyone else is happy. That
is
usually
also me.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it was a whole thing. They were like,
okay, then I would go for a walk in the woods with either of you.
well, yeah. I get eaten alive, and my husband's got one bite, like his arm.
Blood from behind my ears. It's just like, what happened to you?
Swollen welt.
Pretty much.
Just, yes. So, yay for outdoors fun, I guess. You take what you can get, because I do like the outdoors, so it's all good. I like the outdoors when it's not freezing cold.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I want to be inside. All right. Well, thank you for coming on and for the fun story about the creepy lady. Really do dig that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Creepy woman. And it's though kind of sad because she was all alone. So if you had to be possessed, I guess maybe you want your family to try and get you exorcised.
Yeah.
Who knew that would be beneficial? Considering all the stories of the real life exorcisms gone wrong. And those ones are always terrible. But yes, thank you for coming on. And thank you everybody for listening, and check out Mark's books. And that's something else it's Kobo. Right? Is it? Yeah.
I helped create the self-publishing platform, Kobo Writing Life. Yes.
Yes. So
my baby. Yeah.
Mark's books are available all over the place. You don't have to go through Amazon if you don't like Amazon.
Go to all the retailers. Libraries. Go to libraries. Haunted libraries, non-haunted libraries.
Take your pick.
Yeah.
I feel like libraries, there's a lot of places where there's a ton of people. And that's because I've always kind of had this thing that hauntings are that energy that's left over. And the more people went through a place, the more likely it is to be haunted. So a hospital and a library and all of that good stuff. My personal experiences, movie theaters, see a ton of people in and out. Think about
that's true.
Thousands of people at one time, depending upon how big that theater is, and they're coming in 5 shifts a day, 4 shifts a day,
and experiencing high emotion usually, right?
Absolutely.
Fear and sadness and happiness and laughter, like all of these things which can leave an impression in a place.
Hard to agree. And that's why I think those sorts of places, obviously a hospital is going to have all of that. Anywhere where you're enjoying media where it makes you experience emotions, theater, library. So good stuff. All right, guys. Thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram, or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.